Welcome to the Young, Dumb, and in Love podcast, where we talk about all things marriage.
Our goal is to help equip you to have a marriage that is better than you have ever imagined by sharing real-life experiences, getting into the nitty-gritty, and sharing practical ways you can start today. Let's dive in.
Well, it's officially sort of fall in Arizona. When I say sort of fall, what I mean is
It's in the 70s now. But
it's
next
about
week it'll be in the
78.
90s.
We'll be back to the 90s next week.
That's okay.
So we put on sweaters today just to feel like it's
actually very windy today. It's only 72, but next week it's in the 90s.
Yeah, it's very windy outside. Very scary. Thought I was going to fly away.
Okay, drama.
But I love it. Well, Brittany, today we were kind of just going over what we're going to talk about. And it was just a very interesting conversation because I feel like a lot of us, probably most people, deal with this kind of stuff and they don't even realize it.
Yep.
And so let's talk about it and let's go over it. Let's jump right in.
Okay, so I kind of was like, okay, this is what I want to talk about, but I was having a hard time like getting my brain wrapped around it. So I just kind of started talking to myself about it this morning. Do you ever do that? Maybe it's just me.
No, you definitely talk to yourself all the time.
Sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm just going to like fake preach this to myself and see how it, like if it is vibing right.
How it feels.
See how it feels.
Yeah, and then you tested it out on me.
And then I tested it out on Julian. But I feel like you're always like, yo, that's so good. I'm like, but what if it's not? But anyway, today I really wanted to talk about the idea of, are you approaching your marriage the right way? Okay. And like, you're like, okay. And really from the standpoint of, as believers, are you approaching your marriage the way that you should be?
The way that God designed it.
Yes, the way that is intended to be. Okay. And so I kind of was just thinking about, and I don't even know what, like, for me, it's like sometimes I just get these like downloads. Obviously, I believe that they come from the Lord. And then I just kind of have to like work them out. You know, I'm like, okay, this is really good. I really like this. Like, where is this going to go? So I was like, I need to share this. So the whole idea is marriage is obviously designed by God. It's designed to be good. And I think we have a tendency as humans to forget about the spiritual aspect of things. We live in such a fast-paced society where there's not a lot of obviously focus on like biblical values that I think it's very easy to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
And so like, what do I mean? Are you viewing your marriage the right way? Like, we know that if God created it, the enemy hates it. Right?
Yep.
And so, you know, God created our marriages and he wants us to have healthy families, because a healthy marriage, two people who love the Lord, who love each other, who have, you know, a healthy family, you're going to be more effective for God, right? You're going to be more effective. You're going to be able to be a witness, have a testimony of what, like the faithfulness of God. Yeah. The enemy hates that, right? And so I think we oftentimes view our spouse as our enemy. And not like always on purpose, but like they bother us or they annoy us, or we just, over time, we are fighting the wrong battles. Yeah. That's like the concept that I had. So we have a tendency to fight the wrong battles. So we come against our spouse, right? Because that is what's frustrating us or what we feel like is irritating us. When if we really took a step back, we would be able to see like, this is actually a scheme of like the enemy to want to like tear apart our marriage or to sow division in our lives. You know, and the farther you may grow away from your spouse, the more opportunity there is for temptation or, you know, for you to decide like, I actually don't think I love you anymore.
Yeah. Well, you said something earlier that really resonated, and I think it's very important for people to hear. You said everything that the Lord has made that is good and is intended for good, the enemy wants nothing more than to take that and twist it and turn it so that it actually becomes something that's not good, and it destroys you, and it destroys you, who you are as a person, it destroys your marriage and your family.
Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, we know because, we know that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
Like that's literally the assignment of the enemy. Like that is his goal.
Yeah.
Is to come in your marriage and to life, period, but also your marriage, because marriage is such a powerful thing. It's such a beautiful picture. I mean, really, you could go like this could be like a forever series, but like, how the Bible talks so much about the bride of Christ, and the thing is like it's supposed to be a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
Of our relationship with God. And so of course, what is the enemy going to hate?
Yeah.
That, right?
Yep.
And so oftentimes I think that there's two, like we talk about this a lot. Like people have a tendency to like be on this side of the pendulum or this side, and they have a hard time, I think that we shouldn't give the enemy tons of credit, obviously, because he's not deserving of that. But we can't be naive to give him no credit. Exactly. Of like, obviously, there's like deeper issues going on.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I know that's like
makes complete sense.
So really, what I want people to realize is like to kind of bring it to like a point is: are you approaching circumstances in your marriage or your spouse as a whole, as a person, the way that you're intended to approach them, or are you thinking of it more temporary? Like, are you thinking eternal or temporal?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we have written down that we want to talk about today is that God has already given us the right tools to do the job right. And so I'm a terrible gardener. I'm a terrible... if it's green, it's going to end up being brown. Like that's just my gifting. I know the right tools. I know that there are right tools to make things happen, make the yard look beautiful, make things a certain way. I just choose not to use the tools the way that they should be.
No,
the way that should be.
That's what
I'm saying.
Not at all, actually.
The way that should be used, or
good.
The intention is there. It's I am equipped to do what I need to be able to do to make the yard beautiful.
Yeah.
But instead, I neglect the tools that were given to me to provide in that way, and I do nothing with it. And that's exactly what happens with our marriage, and not our marriage, but just in marriages.
It has.
With marriages in general, we have all the right tools. We have so many opportunities to learn and grow and to do the right thing, but we choose to neglect the tools that are given to us. And because of that, marriages fall apart. And that we live in a society that people are literally commenting like, just divorce them, just leave them, like just be done. Like, and there's so much diversity in marriage these days where, 50% of the people are literally getting divorced in the church, not just like in society,
like
but in the church.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's such a good point is like you have all the tools, but you choose not to use them. Mm-hmm. Or you show up with the wrong tools, right? Like, and I think that that's oftentimes the tools that we do have are getting in the Word of God, spending time in prayer together, which people are like, that's so uncomfortable. I don't know how to pray with my spouse or what to say. But we could pray, we can be in the Word, we can be listening to worship music, surrounding ourselves with other believers who are married, and being really careful about like what we're putting into our mind and what we're believing. And we don't. And I think it's really easy. And we talk about this, like things are a lot simpler than we make them to be. So true. Like we almost have this fascination with complexity now. Like how hard is it going to be? Like we want the complex system. And I think that's starting to kind of shift back as like people are like, actually, I just want simplicity. Like I don't want it to feel hard. Like it doesn't need to be complex, because really the things that we need to be able to do or need to do to have a thriving marriage are not hard. Yeah. But we make them hard.
Well, someone taught us a long time ago that you got to keep the plain things the main things. Like if you can keep those simple things in your life, the main things in your life, you will be more successful because you're doing the simple things over and over and over, and they start to grow and grow and grow, and it makes you stronger and stronger and stronger. Like the smallest movements, it's like working out. If you're these small movements, if you continue to do it, your muscles are going to grow. You're going to be stronger. So it's important to keep those simple things, those simple movements, those simple things that you do, the main things that you do. And this is really cool. I have this written down, but sometimes the simplest actions can have the most profound impact.
That's good.
The simplest actions can have the most profound impact in our lives, but we choose not to do the simple things because we think they don't make a difference, or maybe you don't see the difference right away. So it's important to remember that we're in this for the long haul, and the longer you do something, the stronger and better you're going to do it.
Well, and I think that's the hard part too with kind of how we are as a culture now is we want immediate results, and if we don't see them, we just kind of give up, and that can be difficult. But it's like, you know, like you said, like the long haul. And we just don't give value to the things that are valuable. You know, we just think, oh, well, that won't work. Like, I don't want to just pray about it. And I think we're all guilty of saying oh, I mean, I just prayed about it. But it's like, actually, that is so powerful. Like, if you're praying about it, that's actually not just praying, you know? That is such a powerful tool that we've been given. And I had this thought, and this is kind of where it all like this whole idea of this episode started, was we have a tendency to show up with the wrong tools for the job, right? So, or the battle. Like, if you want to think of it like too, or I mean, in the word it talks about, like, we don't fight against, you know, flesh and blood, but against things that we don't see, like spiritual forces, right? So you wouldn't show up with the wrong tools. Like if you're going to go to a painting class, you're not going to bring cooking supplies. You're going to bring painting supplies, right? But we have a tendency to show up with the wrong tools for the job. And so what like that would look like is we may just, you know, start yelling at our spouse or saying, well, you did this and you did that. Or if, you know, I don't know what, you know, practically speaking about that. But
well,
like, you know what I'm saying?
Like you're talking about how you respond to your spouse. Like there are tools out there to help you respond to your spouse in a certain way, but instead we choose to ignore those tools and we just react. And so instead of being proactive, we're being reactive.
Right. Yes. And just like, you know, not really seeing it for what it is. And
well, and that's emotional and spiritual maturity, right? And so your reaction, using tools, being able to do the right thing with the right tools, that's all important. Yes, but you need to have maturity in your life to be able to do that. Emotional maturity, where you're able to take a step back, take a deep breath, and you know, be able to go, I'm going to respond in such a way that I should respond, and here are the tools that I'm going to use to do that. And then spiritual maturity, where you can literally lean on the Lord and trust Him and do what He would want you to do with that. And so the tools, like I said, like with the yard, the tools can be there, but if you don't know how to use them, they're not going to do you any good. You might as well just dig with your hands, you know, like that's not going to do, you're not going to get much done doing that when you have a perfectly good shovel that can help you dig a really, really deep hole. That's a weird analogy because you don't want to dig yourself into a hole, but using the right tools. And then jump in.
I mean, I think yes. I mean, the point is just to be able to say, like, are you using the right tools? Are you coming to the situation with the right mindset, with the right attitude? Because we don't oftentimes, right? And we view our spouse oftentimes as they are the enemy. I am mad at my spouse, or they do this or they do that. And we have a tendency to instead we should take a step back and go, which we talk about this, what is really going on here? And I think that over time, if you can develop the spiritual maturity to be able to say, like, this isn't a fight about the trash not going out or about the way you said that to me earlier. Like, it's not a fight about that. It's actually an argument about this over here that is a bigger thing that I've been struggling with or that we've been walking through. But we have a tendency to we go after the symptoms and not like what's actually going on. Or we don't recognize like, okay, this is actually like the enemy is trying to get us to fight and we are giving into that instead of having the authority that we have to say like, okay, let's stop for a second here. And what is actually going on? Because this argument is completely not productive. It's reactive, not, what did you say?
It's proactive versus reactive.
Like this is not a proactive argument, because I do believe that arguing sometimes can be proactive, right? Like if you're arguing and it's going to come around to a good solution, like that's okay. But this feels reactive. Like we're just arguing back and forth. It's not going anywhere. And sometimes you just have to be like, enough is enough. Like, this isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Or like stop and go, you see what's happening here, right? Like we're fighting and it has no end, and it's just sowing division and frustration and more irritation. And it's creating a chasm that's bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And that's a problem,
a problem. Yeah.
You know? And so we have to be willing. And this is what I love. Like, this is such wisdom. But again, it's so simple. And it's be slow to speak, slow to become angry, and quick to listen.
Yeah.
Like, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. And it's like, it's gold. Like, that is gold wisdom, right? But we have a tendency to totally mess it up or ignore it or just not do it. But it's like being quick to listen really helps us to take a step back and use wisdom. Like when we listen, we can use wisdom. Like, okay, I'm listening to what's happening and what is actually happening, right?
Yeah.
And then being able to be slow to respond to it, like slow to speak, like, okay, so this is what I'm hearing or this is what I'm thinking might actually be happening. And then not becoming angry.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like that alone. Like if you take anything from this podcast episode, like, okay, I'm going to be quick to listen and then slow to speak.
Yeah.
And slow to get angry or just don't get angry. That would be huge.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like this. Like if your kid is misbehaving and you're just like, go to your room. And they go in their room. Like, okay, great. They're in their room. But what was actually going on? You know, and there's oftentimes our kids might be misbehaving and I go, okay, I'm just going to listen. And I ask for the wisdom, like, what is actually going on here? Sometimes they're just misbehaving and they need to just like go sit in the room or go do whatever. And other times it's like, you know what? I feel like maybe this is something that happened earlier. I'm going to ask them if anything happened today, you know?
And typically it is.
And I mean,
typically
most
it
of the
is
time
something that they're frustrated about or struggling with.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
we would have never known. They just didn't know how to express it, but it took our maturity to help them understand and walk through that. And and they always come out on brighter on the other side.
They do. Well, and you know, I think that oftentimes with our spouse, that's also, you know, they're humans. We're all human. We all have things that we walk through that we're going through. And so many things your spouse is maybe battling something or walking through something. And so instead of walking alongside them, it almost becomes like
they become the enemy.
Like
they become the enemy.
They become the enemy, you know? And so,
And that's exactly what we want to avoid is them becoming the enemy, because they are not the enemy. The enemy is the enemy, right? We say that all the time. Your spouse is not the enemy. The enemy is the enemy, and he's the one who wants to seek and destroy you.
Yep.
Your spouse, you said yes to each other. You said, we're going to be with each other. We're going to work through this with each other. But suddenly, somehow, they become the enemy. And that's not the way that God has designed marriage to be.
No. Well, and the thing is, too, is it's like like I said, not giving credit. It's like we have to be aware of that. Like we have to make sure we are aware of the times where the enemy's trying to sow that discord in your marriage, right? Or like come in and speak lies. And, you know, we have to be aware of that. But the only way we're going to be aware of that is if we're in the Word and we're praying and we're submitting ourselves to that, you know, and that, again, is simple but hard for people, you know, and I get that. And I think the beautiful thing is like, it's not, you don't just have to like get it all right the first time.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? You could literally be like, you know what? I'm going to just start praying for my spouse every day, a couple minutes a day. Like it doesn't have to be big. Like you said, it can be so simple.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So a lot of people are going to say, well, I can never have that conversation with my spouse, or I like, it's impossible to even have that conversation with them, or to take a step back, because all they do is ever react, and I'm calm, but they always overreact. Like, how do we deal with that? How am I supposed to have this conversation and not feel like I'm the enemy?
Yeah.
They make me the enemy, or I feel like they're the enemy, like, because there's no conversation that's happening. Like, where do we even start in that moment? And at the end of the day, obviously it starts with communication in a good, healthy place, because if you're in the heat of the moment, trying to establish good communication in that moment, that's not the place to establish good communication with your spouse. It's got to be in a time and a place where you sit down, and that's where you start to build that trust, like we've talked about in the past. You build the trust, you start to communicate more and more. Every single day. You're setting up those walk and talks, you're going on those dates, you're establishing ground rules, like we've talked about when it comes to arguing with your spouse. And those things are so important to build that foundation, to be able to have good communication, so that that you're able to step back in those situations and say, hey, you know what? we need to step back and kind of just think about what's really going on here, and have the maturity to just do that. And take a step back and say, we're not getting anywhere. We're not having good communication. So let's take a step back. Let's both kind of think about what's actually going on here. And then when we come back, we can have a real, adult conversation where we can just talk.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember that so much of this, you don't even have to have a conversation necessarily, but you get to self-evaluate, how am I approaching my spouse, and do I see them as the enemy? So basically,
right? It starts with you.
I mean, yeah, and we say that all the time, and I know that's a hard pill to swallow, because we're no, we just want this to all be good now, but if it's not, then it's going to take some time. But the moment you start approaching things differently, it's going to be obvious.
Yeah.
And the awesome thing too is God can work in them while you're doing these things.
Totally.
Right. And so you may not even have to say anything right off the bat. If it's not already like this. And if you can have that conversation, that's the great thing. You can be hey, I listened to this podcast today, and they were talking about how sometimes we might approach our spouse like they're the enemy. And I feel maybe sometimes we do that, and I didn't even really think about it,
Yeah,
and so
that's good.
I always think about this too, and it's not meant to be manipulative. I think it's, again, wisdom is approaching it where it's not pointing fingers, but that it's been an observation even for yourself. Is I feel I've done this, and do you see that? Or just being wise in the way you're approaching it and saying it. You can still say it, like I said, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So you might want to say sometimes I think we look at each other like we're the enemy, but we're not. And
you said something very key there.
What?
We do this to each other. Instead of pointing the finger, like you said,
right.
You said it so perfectly though. I think
Did
that's something that people need to really capture is, it's not, well, I feel you do this.
Well,
and
yeah, definitely
we tend to
to
point the finger and go, you do this, you did that, you. When if you can approach things in a we fashion, it helps immensely, because
or even
it puts responsibility on yourself as well as your spouse.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes, I think you can do I feel we have a tendency to do this. And if you're ooh, that might even start an argument type of thing. You could even say I think I sometimes look at you as the enemy. I don't mean to, but this is kind of, I've been observing that, or I realized that after I listened to this, so that would be kind of, obviously we never say point the finger, because that is not going to work. Trust me, tried it. So if you want, when they're how you want to be able to teach people from experience. Yeah. So we've tried all of the things the wrong way. Not everything.
Oh, for sure.
But so many things, approached conversations and said well, you do this. And if you would start doing that, then I would start doing this. Or I wish you would do this more. Don't recommend. So I think that's important. That's why I say it's not manipulation. When you're going to approach a conversation, it's wisdom to take a step back and go, what would be the best way for me to have this conversation? It's kind of like this. If you have a work project, right? You're not just going to walk in the room and start saying you did this, you did that. You're going to take a moment. You're going to maybe be like, okay, so would be the best way to present this. And sometimes you have to like actually think about it before you just like
that's really
do
good.
it. You know.
Yeah, that's so good.
Because our human nature, we want to blame. We want to say, well, you did this, so I do this or whatever. I think the thing is too, it doesn't mean I don't feel like that.
Yeah.
Like, trust me, there's times where I am like, I just want to tell him how I really am just like, oh yeah, I do. Like, and even this week, there's been a few times I'm like, this is really getting on my nerves. And I just,
there has been?
It's how it's
I'm
how
just
you
finding out
approach
about
it.
this.
Whatever. No, he's not just finding out. I just think, it's so important to remember, like, God made marriage to be good.
Yeah.
And he wants your marriage to thrive. Like, nothing would, like, obviously other things would bring him joy, but like, it is so his heart that your marriage thrives and that you enjoy it and that it's good. And you wrote something about a jelly roll song.
Yes, because
I literally do not. I think I've heard this like once, but I'm definitely not. This might surprise people, but I am like the least like, I don't want to say cultured, because I am cultured to a certain extent. Yeah. I just like don't pay attention to a lot of like what's going on. Sure. I mean, we walked past the Kardashians in Disneyland. Not kidding, you guys. Yeah. Literally, they were in Disneyland.
Like I could have touched,
and
I could have reached out and been like, "Yo, high five!"
Cool. I am not. I just don't have time. Like I just don't like. I have time for very few things, and so I don't know.
Okay, so the whole point of that was great. It just made me think of one of his songs. But we were just talking about how in order for this to be something in your life. And you wanting to do the right thing and have the right tools. If you want to use the right tools that God has given us, you have to have a relationship with God. Number one, right? Yeah. Make him the center of everything that you do. Make him the center of your marriage. Make him the center of everything. Yeah. Pray about everything. Don't just make rash decisions, right? And we were just like, so many people just neglect this so fast and so easy because of life getting so busy, and they only talk to God when they need a favor. They don't talk to God about everything. Only in the moments. This? He literally sings that song. Sing it? No, I don't. I'm good. But he talks about he's talking about like, hey, I'm very guilty of this. I only talk to God when I need a favor, but the rest of the time I neglect him. We need to not neglect him in everything that we do, but bring him into every situation, bring him into everything that we do. And your life will be so much better because you're going to have the wisdom and guidance that God provides for you. And when you don't, you're just going to talk to him when you need a favor, and you're going to be a little disappointed. Yeah.
Well, I think I've heard people say too, and this, just before we kind of wrap everything up, is I've heard people say, well, why would God care about that? There's so many other things going on in the world. Like, why would God care about, whatever it is? Like, why would I talk to him about that? Because why would he care about that?
It's so small. It doesn't matter really. It's so small.
But I'm like, if it matters to you, it matters to him.
That's right.
And so it's like, talk to him about everything. I'm just like, I also talk a lot in my head, so that probably feels like I'm talking to God even more because there's always like a conversation going on. But everything, like, he does care about like the everything. Details, and so it's like, just bring it to him. It's not going to be like, and like he's not going to be like, oh my me, I'm so surprised. Like, I can't believe that's what's going on in your marriage. Like, so he's not going to be shocked. Like, bring it all. Like, if there's heavy baggage, if there's addiction, if there's struggle, if there's boundaries that have been broken, he's not going to be like, I cannot believe that happened. Like, you're terrible. He already knows, Avi. And so bring it to him. You know what I mean? And even if you're like, hey, like, we've never actually even lived we've never had our marriage be
with God at
the
center.
With God at the center. We don't even know like where to start. Like, what does that even look like? And it's like, you're not alone. And that's a great place for you to start. It's like just saying like, I don't really know, and I was saying, like, we were talking about, okay, so what if someone's like, we have no idea like what to do? Go on the Bible app and look up, like,
there's so many studies and so many things you can do together.
Marriage Bible read through, and like I just finished, I have to do the other version too before I can actually have it released, but it's just like praying for your husband, 21 days of praying for your husband. And it's really simple things that you can be praying that have like scripture and even like exactly what to say. Like, so that if you're like, I don't know what to say, and you don't even have to say it out loud yet. I mean, of course, the goal would be that you're coming together and praying, because that's a huge way to like, you know, grow your marriage and your intimacy together. But even if it's just you doing that to start, you know, it's like, just start.
Yep.
That's the hardest part. Just start. That's the hardest part. Yeah.
Well, bring God to the center of everything that you do in your marriage. I hope today was helpful for you. I hope that you took something and make it a part of your life and your marriage. And if you have any questions at all, you have things that you need to talk about, you want to bring up, if you have any subjects you want us to talk about, we would love to hear from you. So make sure you comment below and hit that subscribe button and become a part of our family. And we appreciate every single one of you guys and everything that you do for showing up and listening to Young, Dumb, and in Love. We'll see you next week.